Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Chris, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Thank you, Robbie. My name is Chris Gavaler, and I'm here because I'm a scholar of comics and superheroes.
Where do you focus when it comes? How do you even get started in studying superheroes? I didn't know you could do that in the first place. And I found out about it. I was like, bro, I got to go back to college.
My kids, they're both in college now, but when they were in high school and middle school, they thought it was a pleasant absurdity that their father was a superhero scholar. That's didn't used to be a category. The way it happened it's been a while now, 2008. A group of students on my campus here at W&L University. It was an honors class, and at that time, the honors program required that students initiate the creation of a class. And they wanted to do a class on superheroes. They were wandering around. They were not finding anyone. They went to my department chair, who at that time was my wife. She pointed them to me, and I'm like, yeah, sure, that sounds like fun. At that point, I'd done absolutely no research on superheroes. I mean, I'd read comics as a kid. I had a passing interest, but I hadn't done it as I didn't think of it as an academic subject matter. And so I started researching the topic for that class, and since then, it's led to 5 different books. I'm now as about as deeply as you can get as an academic.
Now, did you notice when it kind of turned into more of an academic field type area where it started to become more ingrained into society, the love of superheroes and kind of like the modern day myths? I can't really tell you the origin of it, but I can tell you that I can trace it back to some mythology. I mean, in relations like Hercules or biblical references for a person that's like invincible, super strong, a savior. But I mean, I know you wrote a book on the origins as well, too. I'm just curious, like, how deep does it really go, and what I guess to you sparked up this interest in, oh, okay, there's definitely academic excellence here. You can kind of go a little bit farther than just a basic comic book.
Yeah. So my interest, at least initially, was sort of thought of it as cultural archaeology, trying to figure out where this idea came from and under what circumstances did it become popular. You can certainly connect the character type back to various mythologies, biblical and otherwise, but I don't think that's the real origin point for contemporary superheroes, or at least as far as trying to explain their popularity. I started researching, and Superman is considered more or less correctly the first comic book superhero, but the character type was hugely popular in the pulps during the 30s. The Shadow, Doc Savage, and then I knew when I started researching in the class, I'd heard of Zorro. And then I'd heard of the Scarlet Pimpernel. About each of those is like 10, 20 years earlier. And I thought that was it. And then I started researching and discovering that the character type was everywhere culturally, specifically the dual identity masked vigilante. And what I discovered is that with every decade, the character type is to some degree reinvented and connecting to whatever is popular at that moment, whatever's going on socially and politically. Disturbing fact is that the superhero from the 1930s is a direct sort of third generation evolution of the KKK.
What? Wait, what?
Yeah, you heard me correctly. Now, by which I don't mean that there's anything racist about the character type, but 1914, the KKK reformed, and this is different from the post-Civil War KKK. 1914, it was a national organization. It wasn't primarily focused in the South. It was not primarily anti-Black. It was primarily anti-immigrant. There was a fear of Eastern Europeans. There was a fear of Catholics. There was the idea of like America needs to be protected from the supervillain of the Pope. And it was during the 1920s, teens and 20s, there was a sense that we're under attack. America is under attack. White America is under attack, and um, law enforcement was not sufficient to fight it. We need vigilantes. We need people working outside of the law to protect us. Romanticized vigilantism is the disturbing root of superheroes. Now, what happens is after the KKK, their popularity was huge in the teens and 20s, huge. They were considered the good guys. I know that's like as alien twist as you can possibly state, but they were extremely popular, national organization, something like 5 million members. You know, they marched on Washington, D.C. They were admired often. Now, once you hit the 30s, that collapses and the KK becomes the vilified organization as we now understand it, and rightfully so. But what happened, and this is the weird part, is that the character type, I mean, KKK, masked, dual identity, secret identity, vigilantism, that's the superhero formula. It comes from the KKK, it goes into pulp fiction, and then eventually goes into comics. Now, by the time the Siegel and Schuster with Superman, or Bob Kane and Bill Finger with Batman, by the time they get that formula, they have no interest in the anti-immigrant, anti-black racism, bigotry of the KKK. It's got nothing to do with that. But this character type has proliferated and is all over the culture, and that's what continues through to contemporary America now. But it's not that superheroes resembles the KKK. It's that if the KKK had not been revitalized in 1914, we wouldn't have superheroes. The character type would not have evolved. It's a direct correlation.
Now, is this just an obsession with costumes, or is this just an obsession? Like, what's the dual identity come from? Why does that, why do we need, like, I get it, because the common answer is, well, he's got to protect his identity. He's got to be able to do public stuff. Like, Superman's got to get groceries, right? And I'm just like, but why? Like, you know what like, I never understood this dual identity.
And it's because it's separated from its origin point. The origin point is that it's vigilantes who are criminals, whether they're understanding themselves as actually aiding the law. Regardless, they're doing it outside the law. They are literally criminals, and they need to be masked. They need to hide their identity so they're not arrested. It was criminal behavior. Criminals wear masks to hide their identities. That's where the superhero trope came from. You divorce it from criminality, and then suddenly it's like, yeah, do they need to be a secret? And then all these ad hoc explanations are developed and then, brought forward more convincingly. I mean, cases that can be made, but none of them actually make sense. The reason is they needed masks because they were criminals. That's it.
I've thought, like, with criminals, like even Batman, like I consider him a vigilante, but people say no, well, he's still obeying the law. He doesn't kill people. I'm like, well, what's the like, there are laws out there that people agree with, and there's laws that don't. I think it's universally known that people, like, killing people is bad. Everyone agrees on that aspect of things. But then there's, like, I mean, it brings up, I wouldn't say moral questions, but I mean, even if you go to war, like if you're a trooper and you're attacking somebody, if you're killing, we consider it okay because you're killing the enemy. And I'm like, well, they're just people as well too. So it brings up a bigger kind of debate of, like, okay, so killing isn't the drawing line. The drawing line is what laws that you obey. And then I just kind of go, well, look from a global scale. I mean, what's the global scale rules of law there?
Well, it's interesting. To go back, you mentioned Batman doesn't kill. That wasn't always the case. If you look at Batman from the original first year of this comic from 1939, Batman has a massive kill count. I mean, he kills criminals constantly. Superman was just as lethal, though he tended to just allow the bad guy to die. He wouldn't actually. Though sometimes it's interesting, like Schuster, the artist, would draw Superman throwing someone, and you would see them sort of get smaller and smaller, and then out of frame. He wouldn't draw the impact. But it's like, pretty sure that guy died when he landed. It is for children. So what happened is, so the original character types, the original comic book superheroes, Batman, Superman, extremely lethal characters. Batman had a machine gun on the bat helicopter, or the bat plane, I guess it was. Literally machine gun. He's gunning down people on the street. Bad guys. It's okay. So the vigilante was homicidal, or lethal, at least initially. What happened very quickly is that because comics, unlike the pulp magazines, were geared towards children, 12-year-olds, what became DC Comics, their editors learned very quickly, like, we got to clean our act up. And then within a year or two, they had internal codes saying, okay, no more killing. Let's reduce the violence. We're supposed to be appealing to children, and that's when that got locked in. But initially, they were superheroes were absolutely killers. The point is, and that's vigilantism, because the idea is that the individual decides right and wrong, and the individual decides it despite and often in opposition to democratic laws. So superheroes tend to be the arbitrators of right and wrong. And what's interesting, that doesn't change even when they become less lethal. The superhero character type is someone who is not doing good because they're just simply employed by the state to be a cop or a military officer. They have an internal sense of right and wrong, and they impose it on society. And they don't look like vigilantes because the narratives are written so that the reader is in agreement with the superhero's moral positions. But if the superhero had a different moral position, like, say, the KKK, the contrast would become massive.
I think we can all agree, like, there's a comic out there even with Superman fighting Nazis, or I don't know if it's Superman or even Captain America's storyline. That's probably a better example, is fighting, German soldiers. And I mean, he's throwing his shield pretty freaking hard, and some of those people do not get up. So you can say that whether they died or not, but there's a lot of like this, and everyone's in moral agreement of, yes, the Nazis were bad. And I'm not disputing that fact at all, but that's also like, it's still a human being when you boil it down to the skin, no matter what their moral actions are. And it starts going, then does that mean superheroes are more of a Western idea or an America idea? Like, I think even if you look at Black Adam, for instance, great movie. I loved it. Finally, a superhero that doesn't want to take any prisoners. Because that was always the complication for me, where I go, if you fight somebody and they're a criminal and you ruin their whole life and get them jailed for however long, they're just going to plot ways to get their revenge. And I go, was it easier just to throw them out a window? I hate to say it like that, and that's why I don't get superpowers, but it's a real ethical dilemma. How many movies do we see where the bad guy gets out or breaks out and then goes right after the Superman? I'm a superhero. My family's not. These are real questions. What would you do in that scenario? And I think a lot of people value family, and a lot of people value people that they care about, obviously. And it starts going, well, what is it? Is it just a construct for here that the world's kind of adopted? It's like I wouldn't say propaganda, but in a sense.
Well, it's literally a propaganda, and it was World War II propaganda. So the reason superhero comics became popular was explicitly because of World War II. Siegel and Schuster had been creators of Superman. They'd been kicking around Superman, trying to get it published for like at least 5 years before they finally hit it with what became DC Comics. And it was right on the eve of World War II. The United States, the readers, the editors who selected it, the tensions in the United States, there was fear that we're about to go to war, either with Japan or with Germany, ultimately, obviously, with both. And it was that anxiety that suddenly was like, oh, yeah, a Superman, someone who is so powerful that he can enforce our sense of right and wrong on other nations. That's why the superhero comics took off. Again, if it hadn't been for World War II and that national attitude, I don't think it would have ever happened, because it hadn't happened prior to that. Comics were not early comics were not superheroes were not involved. It was only when we were about to go into World War II that it happened. And of course, Superman's costume, it's essentially the American flag. He's immediately popular, and then other superheroes are explicitly wearing the American flag, Captain America, Wonder Woman. So it was the simplified moral attitude of like, America good, kill our enemies. I mean, just boil it down to that. That was the context for why the superhero comics became massively popular. Before World War II ends, as soon as it looks like Nazi Germany is starting to weaken, superhero comic sales start going down, because the character type was linked to this idea of America under siege. And as soon as it was like, oh, it looks like we're going to win this war, superheroes started vanishing. And they come up again later during the Cold War, but for very different reasons.
You think that like, I mean, if we talk about comic books, like, influencing people, but mostly children as well too, do you think that, like, a lot of patriotism came from figures like Captain America, Superman? I know it's the color schemes and it's a really dumb example to draw the line there, but I mean, it to me, that's like a not I wouldn't say brainwashing, but it's really good advertising. I mean, if you're really trying to look at, like, small scales of propaganda, I mean, you got a whole generation of people that think of, like, Captain America and think of Superman and grew up loving that stuff. I mean, it influences people the way people feel about their country, the way that people, that's not a dumb example to use then.
No, not at all. I think it's explicit. I mean, the reason Captain America was created was many of the early creators of superhero comics were Jewish and were very aware of what was happening in Nazi Germany. The United States initially was a let's not get involved in Europe attitude, but many of the creators were like, no, actually, Hitler's bad. We should really be going to war. So the superhero characters invaded Germany, attacked Hitler in the comics before the United States was actually involved in the war. So it was, in the most literal sense, propaganda. It was, I mean, it sounds negative. I think I'm in complete agreement with them. In World War II, Hitler needed to be fought, but they were explicitly trying to convince the American public that Hitler is not going to go away. Hitler is an international problem. We should go to war against Nazi Germany. And then, of course, eventually happens, but only because Japan attacked at the end of 1942. The United States, I don't know if the United States would ever have gotten involved if it had not been for the Japanese invasion.
Yeah. I wonder when it comes to a lot of these, superhero figures and the creation of like a supervillain. Like, I mean, was that I could a lot of comics and a lot of stuff. I know it's intertwined with politics in a sense, but I mean, it becomes like a political weapon. If you're able to demonize a certain character, I mean, you can. I think there's even comic books. I don't know if it's Superman or if it's Captain America, but there's like the communist threat, and there's begins this whole thing of like depicting Russians in a certain way and depicting certain figures that lead Russia, and then it goes down a whole other avenue where it's like, is this comic book now starting to become more of not a comic book anymore? Is now my superhero fighting fights against other people where maybe in another country they might feel differently about Superman?
Yeah, it's totally true. I can imagine every nation having their own set of superheroes that are nationalistic and opposing each other. So it's like, yeah, you look at nationalistic propaganda from another country, and it's like it looks overtly like, oh, well, that's so crass. How could they possibly do that? And then you look at superhero comics from World War II, and it's like, oh, yeah, that's literally the same thing. There's no difference. There's no difference at all.
Now, when it comes like if you look at like the times today, I mean, obviously we live in a superhero culture right now. It seems like everyone's loving Marvel movies and DC movies. I've seen a couple in theaters recently, and I've enjoyed the hell out of them. But when it comes to like the darker side of things, like you got the bull or what is it? Oh my god, I'm gonna blank on the name. The show that just came out with Homelander. Do you know the boys? The boys. So that's really dark, and it's like but that's to me more realistic of what superheroes would be if there was everyone that had powers today, and whether you said they got them through like you were born with them, or that's a whole different debate. But I think it's because like there's a lot of like this goody two shoes, and I think you kind of just changed that my perspective on that through telling me a little bit about the history of it, where it came from. I never knew the kid case up. That's insane. But there is like the boys kind of shows like superheroes with mental health issues. It shows more of a thing that common problems we deal with now. And it's very different than a lot of what the Marvel style movies. And I get it, it's still geared towards kids and things of that sort, but it makes it more relatable. And I think it's because like even with the times, like eventually when did people start to lose out of that comic and that superhero culture? And then this was like a great way of catching on the ramp back to it. The Joker movie changed my perspective on the Joker as a villain. I mean, half the time you're like, oh my God, I could be him. Because there's like moments where life's kicking you down. You realize he's now beaten and broken, and this is what he turned to. And yeah, if someone might have helped him along the way, maybe he'd live a different life, but it makes it more relatable. And I think that entices people, but also scares them as well, too. Because there's a lot of things now that I think people are noticing where like, this is supposed to be a bad guy, but I can relate to a lot of what that person is experiencing.
This is actually, to me, one of the more interesting trends in superhero comics. So you got the golden age World War II superheroes. They had they they were psychological nonsense. So Superman and all these other characters, They choose to fight for the good of humanity for no reason whatsoever. There's never a psychological explanation given for why they would do that. Why would you choose to be a superhero instead of a supervillain? That was the formula from World War II, and has entirely to do with the World War II context. Superheroes comics disappeared during the late 40s and 50s. They come back for marketing reasons, which I won't bore you about. It wasn't like there was some huge cultural cry out for we need superheroes. It was just the comic publishers were trying different things out. The trend that you're talking about that leads to the boys really comes from Marvel Comics 1961, I think it was. The first Marvel comic was Fantastic Four, and it included the Thing. And Stan Lee's innovation was, we're going to have a superhero team. There's going to be four of them. Three are going to be your standard good guy. The fourth is actually going to be a bad guy who's on a team of good guys. And he's going to be the counterpoint. He's not actually buying the superhero stuff. He's a bad guy who's trying to get along with the team, but is always on the cusp of going wild. That was the Thing. He was so popular, they then created the Hulk. And that whole character type of the good bad guy or the bad good guy, that's sort of like the DNA of Marvel, which then influenced all later comics, I would argue. They changed the Thing to be a total teddy bear on the inside, but the original character was a thug. He was just mean, angry, and was ready to destroy the world. That evolved within a year. So the boys really start with the Thing. In the 70s, superheroes got a lot darker. That's when the Punisher was created. It was a real throwback to those 1930s homicidal superheroes. Alan Moore's The Watchmen. All of the characters have
That's dark.
severe mental illnesses, and the boys is just sort of, I would say, reboiled Watchmen, basically. Weirdly, it all comes down to the Thing. Stanley just had one really good idea in 1960, and that changed the entire formula since then. And we keep playing out. It ebbs and changes over the years. Sometimes superheroes get much more goody-goody, but there tends to be a shift back towards that darker side. Is always there now to some extent.
Do you think that it's lost the fantasy aspect in some of the newer stuff? Do you think it becomes a little bit more too real? Like, I know people probably have daydreams. I have daydreams about it. Superpowers, you think of like, what happens if I had super strength? And it's always a common question when you ask somebody, like, what would you do if you had a superpower? And someone would, everyone's thought of it at some point. I just wonder, like, if is there going to be a point where it gets too real, where people will either be turned off by it, or that question starts not to become an average thing you would ask somebody, just because not a whole lot of people are thinking about it anymore because of how real it does get. I mean, even The Walking Dead for me eventually got like a little bit too real. Or I had a dream where, like, I used to think all the time, zombie apocalypse comes, I can handle it, no sweat. Then I had a really intense dream and I was like, no way, I'd be dead. I'd be either patient zero, I'd be dead first week. And it's like, it's a real thing. You got to come to your own grips of not only your mortality, but also the grips of, like, how productive are you going to be with the superpowers you're gifted? You might be able to fly, but have you ever flown before? Or have you ever done anything reasonable? I mean, airplanes coming through, I have no clue. I'm just saying there's a reasonable take on those.
Yeah, the increasing level of realism, I would say the high mark was Watchmen, and then since then it just sort of vacillates. So it's readers. It looked in the late 1980s that the superhero genre was played out. That Alan Moore had taken it to its extreme end. Now let's try to do something different. But of course, Marvel and DC were making way too much money with superhero character types. So that's when the genre started just to really repeat itself. And I think we're still in that phase. It's a fine phase. Marvel Entertainment making the films is just boiling their old formulas and making a lot of money on it and making perfectly entertaining films. This intrigues me because it seems that Marvel is the only company that's figured out how to make a god ton of money on superhero films. Warner Brothers, DC, they keep trying and they keep failing. It's an interesting phenomenon. What Marvel does is they make action comedies. Warner Brothers, DC kept trying to make, because Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, really good trilogy. Well, couple good movies in there. Let's leave it at that. They were successful, and they thought, "Oh, this is how you do it. Superheroes are dark. We want the disturbing realism." And no one out of Warner Brothers has really figured out how to do that again successfully. I guess the Joker, actually, that would be the exception. That was a very popular film. But Marvel's not trying to do heavy. They're not trying to do realism. They're just trying. They're comedies for the most part. I think the last Thor was explicitly a comedy, and She-Hulk on Disney Plus was an actual sitcom. So they know that the formula that appears to sell is don't go too dark, not too much realism, just enough realism so that we can feel that these are real, relatable people, but don't go too far into that dark side stuff. Let's just keep it light. And Marvel figured that out.
Marvel also, I mean, yeah, with the comedies for sure. Thor, Love and Thunder was that was practically all jokes. It's much like Guardians of the Galaxy. Like there's some, but they own a lot of the major superheroes that influence a lot of the culture. I would say when it comes to the superhero kind of field of it. Batman's a good example of DC. Sure, Superman's a good example of DC. But if you're talking about like Captain America, if you're talking about any of those guys, those are the ones like Avengers. We even if you look at the public and their reception towards an actor who plays a certain role. I mean, I still see the Human Torch when, Steve Rogers comes on screen or Chris Evans comes on screen, but now he's really I guess, taken the mantle of Captain America, but that's like Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr. There's so much of it, but there's a weird part that comes in where it comes in the woke culture. I hate to say it like that because I really don't analyze these in films, but I started kind of noticing it if I went to the movies with a buddy of mine. He goes, "Do you notice what they added in there?" And I'm like, "What?" And then you start pointing out things like two moms, and I'm like, "What? That's not normal." Like I have a grandma who's lesbian. I don't see a problem with that. He's like, "It's not a problem, but you see that, like even She-Hulk, for instance. A lot of people had a lot of pushback on She-Hulk in the first couple episodes that it came out. They didn't like it. They didn't like how the Hulk was getting beat up by a woman. They didn't, and there was all these kind of moral arguments that started boiling down. And I'm like, what are people picking up out of films that I'm not seeing? I'm just watching it like, hey, well, I don't care. It's a superhero thing. I want to see somebody smash something. That's all I wanted because that's all I would do. But there's things that people sort of over analyzing and things. And I'm like, are people becoming too invested in superhero movies and turning it into more than what it is just a show? Like I had people that wouldn't even watch any of the She-Hulk series because they were like, no, I'm not doing that. She's a lawyer. What? And it was just completely tossed out that story arc. And I'm like, well, I mean, give it a shot. And then when Daredevil got brought in, then people started hopping on board with it.
She-Hulk was a goofy, perfectly pleasant sitcom that I watched, and it was fine. I liked it enough. These I mean, I don't know. I don't like the term woke because it doesn't actually have a definition. It's just a derisive term for progressive ideas that you don't like. It's like, well, okay, it's not specific enough, and it's not really anything. I think what you're describing is Marvel is taking its literally comics from the 1960s and 70s and 80s, and then taking those exact characters and those exact plot lines, and then trying to make films in in the 2020s now. 40 years is a long time. It turns out a lot of things have changed culturally. So if they actually made films set in the 1970s, that would be something a little different. But even then, they would probably make it a more wider range of characters. So it's simply, I don't think it has anything to do with it's making a film in the 2020s. We're a different culture. They want to make films that reflect our culture because for anyone who's criticizing the idea that entertainment industry is trying to have some kind of mission or some kind of agenda. They have one mission, they have one agenda to absolute most money they can. They will only make a product. Their only goal in making any product is to sell the most copies of it, get the most tickets for it, whatever it is. They only want money. So if they're doing something that you dislike and you're saying, oh, they're trying to shove their politics down our throats, it's like, well, if that were true, they would get punished for it financially and they would stop. The fact that they're doing it is a demonstration that they are getting it right. They are appealing to the largest number of people because they're trying to appeal to contemporary culture. And if you don't like the products they make, you cannot buy them. But your complaint is not with the maker of the film, but with the culture you live in. If you're that out of sync with your culture that you're upset to see, married women. It's like, okay, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Or it's like, oh my God, they made that character black. That character was originally white in the comic book 40 years ago. It's like, okay, if that upsets you, fine. But it's like, just
Well, there,
welcome to
there
the
is a
21st
large amount of
century.
people in that superhero culture that are like really diehard fans of the comics and they want everything to be the exact detail. But I mean, that brings in what Doctor Strange was probably the newest one, was probably one of my favorites. It was the first time ever in a theater I stood up and said the F word, and I never do that. It was just when I saw what is it, Black Bolt, when his head exploded. Have you know? I don't want to spoil that for you if you've
I'll
seen
be
it.
okay.
Okay, his head exploded, and I'm like, holy, like it was something I was like, I would have never in a million years they would have done that in a Marvel movie. I would have never thought they would have done that in a superhero movie if someone's head exploding like that. But it happened, and I outbursted in front of everybody, and I still get goosebumps even thinking about it. But it was something that was so dramatic and so on there, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe they didn't even give this guy a chance." I'm like, "Hang on a second. The best part of having alternate dimensions and alternate realities and all that is they could just do another dimension or do something else. It's completely like this, none of this." And then my buddy goes, "Well, that means that none of it matters." And I'm like, what are we talking about here? We paid $13 to go see it in theaters. Like, there's not a big issue here. We can just go, another time and see a whole nother film. But it is an attachment. People get this like devotion towards a certain superhero. I thought initially that was home field advantage. And what I mean by that is Spider-Man protects the city that he lives in. Superman protects, I guess, America. But there's people like from Brooklyn, from whatever. And if you're from that place, that's your superhero. That's the person. Like, I mean, I guess Spider-Man's did Brooklyn. I think he's Brooklyn. Um, some New York something, but that's people identify with that. It's kind of like being on a sports team. If you're from the place, you choose that sport. And there's a lot of people I know that are like, I'm fans of this because my family's from here, but this and this and this and that. And it's like this identification that people start to have. I'm like, do you like any of his powers? Like, I don't want to know who the person is that likes like what is it? Green Arrow. I'm sorry. That's not my favorite character. Mine's Green Lantern. So
It's a fun character. Yeah, the phenomenon you're describing, it stands a lot past just superhero movies. Like the recent Lord of the Ring television show on Amazon, or with the Harry Potter, not so much the films, but there was a play produced of a Harry Potter story, and the actress cast for Hermione was black, and some people were just outraged at that idea. And yeah, I guess,
was anybody outraged at the Watchmen TV show? That
oh,
was
lots of people. That
that
was
that CGI was terrible. I was so upset. I was like, I don't care who plays them, but good God.
yeah, that's what people were mostly upset about with She-Hulk too. But it's like, whatever. I don't really care about the CGI. For me, it's like I get so tired of the CGI because it turns everything into just photorealistic cartoons. I would love to go back to just actual live action films. I mean, Marvel. I mean, okay, so you mentioned the Doctor Strange film. It was not a spoiler alert because I watched the first 10 minutes of that film and was, I'm sorry, so bored out of my mind.
What?
I could not keep going. It's just I'll still watch the occasional superhero movie, but the formula. I mean, Marvel has just, I mean, perfected it. It's the marketplace. If it sells, it sells. So they've perfected their formula, and they apparently can keep this up for decades, because they have already. I'm just really tired of the product. All I can see is the Marvel industry has figured out exactly. You can watch the touch points as you go through the film. Here's the laugh line. Here's the kind of banter. It's all just so mass produced now. I'm just tears of boredom. I just weep when I see a Marvel film now.
There was some things like Spider-Man Far From Home that I had to go see just because I love Sam Raimi's Spider-Man.
I
And
went to see that, and it
it,
was just like 8 hours long.
yeah, it was really, really long. I was happy when they finally introduced Toby, even though he was only like in the last 30 minutes of it. But I thought that was like an interesting take. But I mean, they had something for a little while where it was like What If, that whole animated series, and then they had it connect into a lot of the things. Like that was a lot of Doctor Strange too. They had some What If episodes that were incorporated in there. Then they were doing really good Loki leading up into like WandaVision and then all that. And then now it's just I don't know. Like, I mean, there's a break now, and I feel like they were capturing so much momentum. And I think there's some new movies coming out in 2023. I'm excited to see the new Shazam when it does come out. And but some people didn't like the first one. And I just I don't get I don't know. I see it as a movie. People kind of tend to get, like I said, the identification that people start identifying themselves. Like a good example, Ben Affleck with that movie where he dressed up as Superman and the kid brought a gun and was going to shoot him, and he was like, "If you shoot," you ever see that movie?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was Unbreakable.
But that's a real, like, people identify, and like that's a like an example of like how much it influences the culture, especially a young kid. If they see someone at Disney World or see someone, that's them, and that's what kind of what Disney World does, is try and produce that image of like, I am the character, 100% the character, which I think is good. And I think obviously it's kids and imagination, but that moment in that movie, well, I know it's a movie, but very, very gripping and very, very realistic in a sense of like, oh God, that could actually happen if someone a kid got a gun and wanted to test it out on Superman.
Yeah, yeah. What's happened is, I mean, we still talk about superheroes as oriented toward children, but that's not actually that's not what's going on. Comics, superhero comics stopped having a primary focus of children around the 80s. I think the current average age of a comic book reader now is something like 28,
What?
which is, yeah, yeah, I mean that literally. Comixology, the online digital platform, they did a poll and tried to figure out, who our readers are. 28. The average comic book reader is 28. It's not children, and of course, the people buying the tickets to all these Marvel films and what else, they're not children. They're not even teenagers. The main market is 20 somethings.
I'm
And so
25.
there you go. And nothing wrong with that. My kids are around your age. And but it's the fact that we still think of them as, if we still think of superheroes as a children's market or a children's idea, it's not. It's entirely geared towards adults, but it has this weird connotation of childhood.
Do you think that's dangerous to do with movies? Like if we talk about action and exposure for kids, like I mean, kids are obviously coming across more violent stuff all the time, and they kind of seems like the generational kind of. I mean, back in the day, you couldn't show certain things on TV. Now it's like seems like it's commonplace and it's in every TV show. But I wonder about that because like my nephew thinks I'm Tom Holland because I kind of look like him, and my mom just like thought it would be funny to go around. So he's into Spider-Man. That's his favorite one. So like I get it because those are relatively really good movies, and they're not like very dramatic or very like, I mean, some of them are, the newest one was at least, but there's not like serious violence. Like if you're watching some person's like head explode, like I wouldn't want him to watch Doctor Strange too. But there's like a connection. And I'm like, I wonder, because a lot of these movies, I wonder if it's a generational thing. Like if we talk about people in their 20s or late 20s that are watching movies, that's mostly the audience now. I go, okay, what time period were they born in? And then when was the comic starting to be shifted back up again? And these people are attached to things of childhood, and it's kind of nostalgia for a lot of people to watch comic book movies and things of that sort.
In my class, I have my first year writing seminar is focused on superhero comics because it's just fun and it's a good way to get students involved. I asked that class what age they were when they first encountered a superhero and what was the medium, what was the circumstances. None of them read comics, literally none. It was all TV, film, some video, and all like when they were, I think the mean age was around 6 or 7. So we entered a different cultural moment where when Marvel started making superhero films, they were adapting comic books and introducing characters that the general public didn't know. Iron Man, Hulk, Captain America, Thor, those were actually all very, very minor characters. They had to be newly introduced. And of course now they're massive. They're bigger than, Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman used to be the DC crowd used to be the best known superheroes. That's no longer the case. So now Marvel has the happy situation of they're making films for viewers who grew up on their films. It's a really very different situation than the one they started with. They must be very happy with themselves over Marvel. They're making a lot of money.
Do you think it's because they manipulated that model or found the right, I guess, algorithm or whatever they're using template wise? But they create so many, and it's such a short. I mean, DC waits a little while before they crank out one and they do one, and I think that's what's destroying their growth and kind of why Marvel's like beating them outright is because of the Marvel's McDonald's model, where it's like, let me pop one out every second I get a chance, like Guppies, and I'm like, dude, like give us a little bit of time. Like I see so many people that will go and track the movie when the dates are going to be for the next listing and next listing and next listing. And they're like, oh, wait, it'll be okay because we'll have Loki here and then we'll have WandaVision right after. And I'm like, take a break, go outside, experience life a little bit.
Doesn't want you to take a break. They figured yeah, they figured out how to do it. The only reason the only reason Warner Brothers doesn't have more films coming out is they keep not making money. So they had plans, and then like Justice League came out, and I think it was a terrible film, deserved a flop, and it flopped. And then suddenly they canceled the 3 films they had on deck. So it's not that Warner Brothers would love to do the Marvel formula approach. They just keep failing at it miserably. Marvel figured it out. It took them a little while when they, when the first 2 Hulk films, there was an Ang Lee film like around 2002, and then one Incredible Hulk a few years later. Neither of those were very good. Neither one caught on. And then they had to reintroduce the Hulk in the first Avengers film. So they had some missteps early on, but once they figured it out, they've just been running with it. And the fact that what you just described, you have people, I mean, the idea of staying and watching after the credits for the preview scene for the next film, I mean, that used to not even be a thing. They didn't introduce that, but they're the ones who made it that particularly commonplace, and it wasn't before. So I keep thinking surely at some moment it's going to ebb. At some point, I remember superhero films got popular right after 9/11, and some people were trying to analyze it as a response to 9/11. Maybe it was, or maybe that was just circumstantial. I'm not sure. But I remember reading reviews of films from like 2027, maybe 28, and people were like, "Well, surely the superhero thing's going to stop now. I mean, surely we've hit the top point and it's going to just go away." The only thing that resembles it is westerns. Westerns were massively popular, yes, beginning in the silent age, but they really took over in the 40s and 50s, and they were still popular in the 60s. They really had a 4-decade run. And then 70s, they made it into it, but by the 80s, Western was gone. And now every once in a while, there'll be a single TV show or a single film that comes out. But 1960s TV, like half of it was Gunsmoke and all westerns. So at the moment, the superheroes is as popular as the westerns were in the 50s and 60s. I don't know why the western died, but it died horribly. It's gone, eviscerated. I keep waiting that surely the superhero is going to hit that. And I'm not even sure if it's a saturation point, because like the westerns saturated, but then they kept up at that level the same way the superheroes. I mean, like you're describing, it's like, how can Marvel put out 3 films a year and yet everyone seems to be perfectly happy with that? So they're saturated, but they're maintaining it. I don't know how long they can do that, but I'm not going to bet against them because they seem to have either luck or extraordinary marketing talent.
I think there's like Guardians of the Galaxy, the newest one that's going to be coming out. It's going to be their last one. There's certain people that, like I said, get invested into those roles or the actors. Like if we have Robert Downey Jr., that's the end of Iron Man. People are going to want that mantle to not be picked up by somebody else. Now they could do it, but I don't know if it's going to be received well. Like we've had many Batmans, but even there's still points of contention with Batman. People go, Adam West is my Batman. People go, duh, duh, duh. Well, the best thing that they did with the Spider-Man series is they all hated Andrew Garfield's film. But then once he's in the newest one, they go, oh my God, he's redeemed. We get it now. We get the dark side. But now you have a whole other story arc. That opening up to multiverses has now made it to where you can literally bring back somebody. You can change around. You can do so much. Where I feel like even with that is going to maybe lose some people as well, too, because then it's like, when does the end happen? Every beginning has an end. And now there's not going to be one if you can just keep recreating and literally changing the person you used to admire into someone that you do not want to see on the screen again.
Yeah, I think it was I was delighted by the Spider-Man film, just the idea of like they're actually going to connect to those old films. Actually, all that has more to do with copyright. It has so much more to do with copyright than creativity. I mean, it was a creative choice, but what happened is that Marvel, before Marvel started making films, they would license out their characters to other film companies. So they licensed out Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. They wanted them back, um, and now eventually what happened is that because because the Andrew Garfield the second Spider-Man film flopped, and it deserved to flop. It was a terrible, terrible film. Sony said, "Okay, we don't know how to make these movies. You guys seem to know how to do it. We will sell back half of the rights to you, and we'll split profits, and we'll give you creative control." So that's how Tom Holland became Spider-Man. And because of that financial agreement, it meant they could connect to those old films that Sony had made. So it was only because of this copyright, um, very legalistic arrangement that the idea came up of like, oh, since we have the rights to all these films simultaneously, that's never happened before. We can actually we can do something with that, and that's when they created the multiverse in films. So it was really just, it's always about money.
Capitalism always wins. I wonder if we're ever going to see a movie that hits on that, like just focuses in on capitalism. I think that was interesting about She-Hulk was that she was a lawyer. At least you get to see some political stuff. I'm not saying I want my superhero comics or any superhero movies to be political, but I was like, hey, we get to see like real stuff a little bit too, not someone flying off into the middle of a desert or someone off world on a whole nother planet that I've never heard of before, and they try and explain it in 10 minutes, and they do a fantastic job, surprisingly. But it's catching people up on stuff. I mean, I think that's also another area they're probably going to explore is more intergalactic conflicts, not just for a lot of times everyone would talk about, does Superman only protect America? Does he going around the world and saving everybody? And I think it brings it out of that realm a little bit and kind of hits to more intergalactic conflict. There's a show out there, Invincible. I don't know if you've ever seen that. That's graphic and I love it. I mean, when the dad takes the son and but brings him down into the train part and then holds him there and just runs through all those people. You're like, what is happening? What is going on? And that's more graphic, but it's also kind of showing, I think it's getting more people interested, where I start wondering, is that going to push the Marvel studios to try and capture on that as well too? I feel like The Boys had to impact something out there. I mean, at least in the way the public's going to receive something, and maybe we'll see that reception later after a movie comes out and it might not do so well, but they're also dusting off old people that a lot of people haven't heard of. I mean, Blue Beetle, that's not a common name around anybody's household. So they're making that film this year. So,
Oh,
and that, yeah,
yeah, people, that's hilarious. Yeah, DC owns them. That's actually sorry, minutia trivia, but the Watchmen. You know the character, the owl. What's his name from Watchmen? I'm forgetting the character's name.
Night Owl.
Night Owl. Thank you. Yeah, that's Blue Beetle. What happened is that DC purchased a defunct company, and inherited and bought up all their old characters. And the original Watchmen was the old characters, but then the editor said, no, no, just change all the names into slightly different characters because we want to do different things. Yeah, so for a while, a lot of DC would just buy out other companies. So they kept getting larger and larger crew of different characters on different various worlds. And each world was based on a previous comic book company that they now own. Intermingling of all these characters is massive. There are more superhero characters than could ever be made into films. It's an almost seemingly infinite list. Blue Beetle, I agree though. That's surprising. I didn't know they were going to do that.
That's dusting something off. But The Watchmen, I watched that with my family when it first came out. And I was like 14, I think, at the time. And then I like 10 minutes in, my dad was like, "This is not a family movie, Robbie." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know. I saw superheroes and people in masks, and I just assumed." Like you don't expect that type of dark stuff, especially as a kid. I was expecting more of like what I've seen before, like Incredible Hulk movies. I mean, even that was a little bit far. But what do you think about like bringing in more of the moral value or moral message, that meaning in films. Like there's always like a I wouldn't say a biblical plot line, but there's always something that gives you like the superhero learned from this, and there's always a message that gets inscribed where you go, okay, you learn a life lesson or you learn something like that. I don't see a whole lot of that in the Marvel movies. Maybe I'm missing it, but like I just see a bunch of action, I guess action comedy and stuff like that. But there was always like the Joker movie would show you a moral lesson of like, don't be rude to people. You know, if someone's experiencing something, I think it kind of voiced the alarm on depression a little bit. But, I think like that taught like a moral lesson in some aspects. But then Marvel movies, I'm not getting a moral lesson out of something. Don't time travel and meet yourself in the past and the future. I don't know.
I think what you're describing is an effect of serial fiction. So if you're writing one story, one film, you have a story arc, and you can infuse it with whatever value opinions you have, and then you're done. And then the successful one is like, well, write a sequel, and it's like, okay, what was the last thing that happened? Okay, now this happens, and then now Marvel just does that again and again and again and again and again, and their only goal is to perpetuate the products. So yeah, so a standalone film can be coherent that way, but they're just like, well, what happens next? There's no you know there's no moral under. But I would disagree that there was ever really a moral underpinning. That was just one aspect of the original product. I mean, you said earlier that you don't want all your superhero films suddenly to be political. I'm of the opinion that all entertainment is at some level political, which is to say it encodes certain values. And if you agree with the values, you tend not to notice them. If the values are something that puts you off, you suddenly say, stop being so political. But if it's invisible, it just means you're sort of breathing it like air and you're not even noticing. So superheroes have values, political, social values connected to them inevitably. It's just the question of to what degree is are the creators going to push that forward or make that a background effect? But there's always something. Everything is, to some degree, propaganda for some set of opinions, some set of values.
Yeah, I learned about that from the 60s and 70s, diving into the FBI's invasion into Hollywood, and just, I mean, so many influences, even in modern day films today. Like, I mean, Walt Disney in the beginning didn't start off very dark, but he has messages in Hoover you can find on the FBI website where it's like, we're just going to insert FBI agents in Mickey Mouse cartoons. The kids will love it. And Hoover's like, yeah, do that. Let's keep our image in the eyes of the children. Maybe we'll have more FBI agents become. And then the ending becomes he's ratting out people that are striking up labor unions because and calling them communists and having them deported. And you're like, oh my God, it went so dark so quick. It's like 700 pages, but it's over like months that this relationship starts to develop. And it's like, I mean, there's influence into so much stuff. And you don't notice it until I feel like you don't notice it until someone points it out to you. Like Batman being attached to Commissioner Gordon, he's attached to authority. That's an authority figure because he has to be under control by somebody. It's like, okay, Lethal, and I think even with like the Lethal Weapon movies, he's a badass, but he's still attached to authority. There's someone that is his chief. There's someone that he still has to take orders from. And it's because you cannot lose that law enforcement, that idea of government, that whatever structure that a lot of things need. There's always structure somewhere. And I think like once you start analyzing that, like a lot of people pull Wonder Woman, for instance, they go, it's a feminist thing. And I was like, I don't see that, but I can get it. I mean, the Amazons, that makes sense, but why not? Who cares? I don't really see that as a problem, not to go see the movie or anything, but 1984, for instance, was not a good one. I will say that. I liked them all, but that was a terrible thing. But I think like there's obviously people want to associate. I mean, if you have a bunch of male superheroes, you're going to have a bunch of your female audience is going to want one that they can relate to or envision themselves. And I mean, that's the initial thing I think with comics and superheroes in general is that you could close your eyes and you could be that person. I think that was Stan Lee's quote. Now, I don't know if that's a marketing trick, but he said it.
Yeah, so yeah, you're describing, the filmmakers are responding to the audience. The audience is half their potential audience is female. They would be fools not to try to go after a female audience. It's like that's again, it's just about money. So yeah, I thought the first Wonder Woman film was fantastic within the category of superhero films. I thought I thought it worked really, really well. And I'm of the opinion, and this is my opinions and values. I quite liked seeing a female character in the position of what almost all the other films had only male characters in that position. It's like, yeah, that's good. I like that. I'm a feminist, which is simply to say I think men and women are essentially alike and deserve the same rights and opportunities. That's not a very radical statement. Anyone who would disagree with that, I'd feel a little concerned about. But
I think
I think
that's normal. I don't think that's being a
yeah, exactly.
feminist.
Well, I agree completely. Feminism is normal. So if you disagree that men and women are essentially they deserve the same rights and responsibilities and opportunities, and
I just need a good movie with a good plot. The rest of it, I don't care who plays it. I don't care who does it. If it's a guy, girl, whatever. I just want a movie with like a good story that actually gets me like I did in Doctor. I can't believe you don't like Doctor Strange too. But what got me literally in the theater to get up and like say the F word. Like I've never, ever in my entire life done anything like that. But it was so out of left field. It felt like I was watching an M. Night Shyamalan film. So that's what I enjoy is like I'm tired of seeing the same like every time they repeat the Batman story arc or every time they repeat the Superman story arc or something. I'm like, dude, just do it different. If you're gonna do it, just do it something where I don't have to worry about like I know how it ends up. I know how the whole storyline, the background losing his dad, Batman losing both of his parents. I don't need to see that again. I just want to see something different. And I think sometimes they get that in some aspects of things, but also, I mean, it's a moneymaker to always play the origin story over and over again. You see that with Robert Pattinson's Batman, which I didn't think was that bad, but that was long too.
I didn't see that. I heard it was fine.
It's like 3 hours, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And well, again, though, it's just marketing. Apparently, people are really enjoying the long films. I think it's because of Netflix binging. I think that was the cultural shift. It's like now when I see a movie, it's like I don't care how long it is. It's sort of like, oh, that's it. I wish you'd made that into an 8-episode Netflix, and then it would have been longer, and I could keep watching it. So yeah, I think our taste in length changed because of online streaming. We can consume so much more that way that it's becoming an expectation. A 90-minute film sort of feels like, well, that was a perfectly fine episode, but where's the rest of the series? And I guess that's again why Marvel is so successful. They're essentially creating a massive multi-episode single series because you can just watch them in a straight line. They're trying to create the sense of like, yeah, this is the next episode. Sure, it's got a different title. Sure, the main character is different, but it's part of the same continuing storyline, which is something that Stan Lee created in the early 60s. Comics from the golden age, each one was standalone. And there weren't stories that continued one issue to the next. That was something that Stan Lee really emphasized, and that all of the different comics under Marvel were connected. So if you see a character show up in Fantastic Four, you know that character could also show up in Spider-Man, if these things were all happening simultaneously. And it really was one big story. DC did not do that. Marvel really invented that idea in the films, and Stan Lee had nothing to do with the films. The films took his aesthetic, and I don't know if that's why they're so popular, but that's certainly one of the ways that they're able to perpetuate themselves. It feels like one massive story, and people have already bought in, and they're like, well, show me the next chapter. I want the next chapter. I can't stop reading now. And no other company has been able to hit that same kind of critical mass.
Do you think through your research that superheroes, just the culture in general, has had a more positive impact or negative impact?
Neutral. If we weren't writing this massive wave of superhero films right now, there'd be something else in the same place. So it's not that I don't think they're better or worse than mostly anything else. They're just I tend to think that entertainment, it's circular. Entertainment reflects the culture, but then it also reinforces aspects of the culture. And so it self-perpetuates that way. But if it weren't for superhero films, it would just be something else filling that reflective position. So I'm neutral towards superheroes.
The worst thing would be a Jersey Shore film. Oh my God.
I'm glad you got. Oh my God, yeah, that would be a universe in the multiverse that I do not want to visit.
Yeah, the culture of superheroes. I mean, do you honestly think it's not going to end? I feel like we're hitting a point. I mean, I would have said that probably 5 years ago, but it just feels like there's a lot of like people now. I mean, there's so much out there, especially with Netflix, and I think Disney Plus is starting to gear more cartoon movies, and even then, you're still having older people go check out cartoon movies as well too. Just because it's interesting. I mean, the new Buzz Lightyear did not go well at all, I heard. Uh, but it's hard. That's something that there was obviously a whole entire line that went with that, and then people thought they were done at a certain movie, and I think they're making a new one now too. So I think it's the fifth one, Toy Story 5.
Wow, really? Yeah. With yeah, I predicted that it was going to ebb 15 years ago. I was so completely wrong that I'll never make another prediction again, at least on that topic. So I have no idea. It certainly looks like, I mean, Marvel calls it phases. So they're now starting phase 5. When they started, Iron Man was one of the first Marvel films that was made by Marvel as a company, as opposed to being farmed out to to other producers. When they were making Iron Man, the in joke when they were like writing the script and producing it was, "Oh, we'll save that for the sequel," and then they all cracked up. I thought there wasn't going to be a sequel. Now it's like, they have them planned out for literally the next decade, and of course, so did Warner Brothers, but their plans kept collapsing. So at any moment the bubble could burst. But it's been holding steady for 15 years. I don't know. I don't know what maintains it. I don't know what could weaken it. I can't imagine it getting well. Actually, you're right. With Disney Plus, it is going even further because it's not just the films anymore. You suddenly can watch 8 episodes of whatever, and it all tells part of the same story, just another angle of it. So it does seem like a lot, but yeah, they'll keep doing it until people stop buying it.
Well, Chris, I really appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show, man. I love talking about superhero. I mean, I didn't realize they impacted so much until you really start diving down into it. But is there a place where people can find your books, your links, and any other, Twitter, social medias, or your website?
Sure. Actually, my books are sort of like on the wall there. We got Origin of Superheroes, Comics Forum, Superhero Thought Experiments, Superhero Comics. You can find those, Google them anywhere, Amazon, find them anywhere. I have a blog called the Patron Saint of Superheroes. I blog about all sorts of different stuff. You certainly can stop by there once a week and see what's going on.
Well, I'm going to link that all in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and thanks for listening to this episode Out of the Blank podcast.